All right. Hi, everyone, and welcome to our very first live Q&A for National Quilter Circle. We're so excited to have you with us tonight. My name is Ashley, and I'm going to serve as sort of our moderator for the event, asking your questions to the wonderfully talented Heather Thomas. So tonight we're going to answer your questions live, both questions that were sent to us prior as well as ones that you guys ask during the next hour, and we're going to get through as many of those questions as we possibly can. Before we get started, Heather, do you want to say a couple of things and kind of introduce yourself, and then we'll get started?
Okay, hi, I'm Heather Thomas. I've been quilting for a very long time, I think 30 years or so, and teaching forever. And I'm just here to hopefully dispel some of the crazy myths that are out there or things that are getting in your way so that you can have a little bit more fun in your studio.
Perfect. All right, so let's just get right into the questions. Our first question comes from Helen, and she asks, as a beginner, where do you suggest that I start?
I was thinking about that earlier, and I think it's important that you find a couple of basic projects. My suggestion is to get a really good basic book and choose two projects from that book, one that's based on square cutting and square sewing squares together, and one that's based on linear cutting, sewing strips together. Once you learn how to sew two squares together and get an accurate seam allowance and sew long strips together and then recut them into units, you're going to have the basics of what you need to know. So you could do a 4-patch, you could do a log cabin, something really basic, but make sure that you get some good instructions to do that with. And once you start jumping in, you're going to find that certain things come easy and certain things come hard. Go with what's easy in the beginning until you feel really, really comfortable.
I think that's perfect. It's always great to start with something a little bit easier so you don't get frustrated off the bat. Makes things a lot more enjoyable. All right, so then our next question comes from Lori, and she wants to know how you determine what the best thread is to use for a certain project.
Best thread for what?
How you decide what thread to use for a project.
For a project? Well, one of the things that people don't understand is that most spools of thread tell you information on them. They'll tell you whether or not they are a heavyweight thread or a lightweight thread, and they'll tell you whether they're 2-ply or 3-ply, and often they'll say piecing thread on them, or quilting thread, or hand stitching, or hand sewing, or hand quilting thread. So pay attention to what's on your thread. And those are the basic 3 types. We use a particular thread for piecing and a different thread for quilting a lot, but that doesn't necessarily have to be true. What you want is a thread that really matches the job well. If you stick with 50 weight and 40 weight cotton threads, you can pretty much do anything you want to with those 2 threads. Most of us piece with 50 weight cotton. If we use a heavier thread, then you can actually see that thread in the seam line and it gets a little bit bulky. So you want that 50 weight, which is kind of right in the middle of our weight system, for piecing, and then something heavier for the quilting, like a 40 weight. And cotton is almost always the best if you're stitching with cotton. Fabrics. If you're stitching with other fabrics, then you can move to a different type of thread. I always say match the fibers. So match cotton to cotton, silk to silk, rayon to rayon, and you're making the best selection. Make sure that your threads are good threads, though. Don't buy cheap threads after you've spent all that money on fabric. Buy the best threads you can buy. And you want to stick with the names that you see in quilt stores versus the names that you see in fabric stores. The quilt stores carry the higher quality threads.
Okay, along the same lines, we have another question based on thread. And Val wants to know if it is possible to use metallic thread for quilting.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Now, that being said, some machines just do not like metallic thread, and so if you're battling nonstop with a metallic thread, it could be just your machine doesn't like it. But if you're going to use metallics, you want to use a Metallica needle, or any type of needle that has Teflon inside the eye hole, and those Metallica needles are going to give you your best bet. Those metallic threads are all metals that are wrapped around a core, and the core is sometimes cotton, sometimes polyester, and sometimes rayon. And it should tell you what it is. I prefer the rayon, and the reason is because rayon is stretchier than the polyester and the cotton. So when it moves through the machine and those metals catch on things, instead of breaking, it just stretches a bit and then it tends to keep going through. If you try some metallic threads and you're using Metallica needle and you're still having problems, loosen your tension just ever so slightly, a quarter of a turn, and that should make it a little bit easier. But there's also a product that's called Sewer's Aid or Sewer's Ease, depending on the brand. And this is a silicone liquid that you just run over your thread. You just hold your spool thread between your thumb and your forefinger and run beads of the product along the thread. And what this does is lubricate it so that it doesn't break as easily or fray as easily. Now keep in mind, though, that once that metallic thread is in your quilt, it's not the softest thing, so you wouldn't want to put it on a quilt that you're going to be having around your face or something, so a bed quilt that you're sleeping with. It's also not as strong as regular cotton thread, so I wouldn't put it in a quilt that I'm going to be laundering and using a lot. But for decorative purposes, it's fabulous.
Okay, and along those same lines, depending on the type of thread you're using when you're doing your quilting, do you change up what you put in your bobbin, or do you buy strictly only bobbin thread?
I am just dyed in the wool, always matching my bobbin thread to my top thread. And the main reason I do this is because no matter how wonderful your machine is or how perfect its tension is, if you're free motion quilting and you're moving in quick circles, the tension sometimes just can't keep up. If I've got matching thread in the top and bottom, then I know that if the thread gets pulled a little bit to the top or a little bit to the bottom, it's not going to show differently, and that's really important to me. The other thing is that you pretty much want to match the weight, or you can be slightly lighter. So if you're using a 50 weight to quilt with, you can use a 60 weight in your bobbin. You'll get a lot more thread on the bobbin. You won't have to change it as often. But don't use a 60 weight in your bobbin if you're using a 30 weight on top. Your machine won't like it, and it won't really look good. So yes, I always match my threads. It gives me a much better success rate. I don't have to worry about those peekaboo little dots showing.
Okay, perfect. All right, so we're going to change gears a little bit from thread and go to sewing machines. So Chris wants to know, can I quilt on my home sewing machine? If so, what all do I need with that machine in order to start?
Well, absolutely. If we couldn't quilt on our home sewing machine, some of us would never quilt ever. I've never owned a long arm or a mid arm even. All I've ever quilted on is my home machine. And I think it's fabulous. I love it. What you need is a machine that can drop its feed dogs if you want to quilt with your feed dogs down. You need a walking foot and a free motion foot. Now, the free motion foot is sometimes called a darning foot, and it's a foot that often has a little spring action in it. A lot of today's newer machines have hovering feet. They don't hop like the old ones do. They simply hover over the surface. But as long as you have those feet, you're going to be great. Now, some machines you don't even need a walking foot for if you can change the presser foot pressure. So on my machine, I loosen that presser foot pressure so it's not pushing down on the machine so much, and I can just stitch normally when I'm doing straight line stitching, when I'm not doing free motion stitching. So really, you don't need a whole lot of special tools. You don't need those sliders, you don't need those handles, you don't need any of those things. Certainly some people think they help in the process, but I like to just get my hands on the quilt, hold it like it's a steering wheel, and quilt. And so you can do it on basically any machine. Even old Singers you can get generic free motion feet for. I've met very few machines that you can't quilt on.
Okay, good to know. So speaking of free motion, we have a couple of questions about free motion quilting. Cindy wants to know, she says this is her first time free motion quilting, and she wants to know how you choose a stitch length to use.
Well, when you're free motion quilting, you don't choose your stitch length. Your hands do. Once you drop those feed dogs or put that hopping foot on, that action of the spring action that moves up and down, what controls your stitch length instead of the machine itself is how fast you move your hands in response to how fast the machine is stitching. So if you go to start stitching free motion and you're finding that your stitches are really big, it's because you're moving your hands really, really slow and the machine's going fast and you're getting big, big stitches. If you can't even see your stitches, it means you're moving way too slow and the machine is going really, 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 really fast and you're basically moving all in one place. So I think I said it wrong the first time. You're going too fast the first time. So you want to match those hands so that they're moving at a speed that, with the machine going at a particular speed, everything's lining up and you're getting a nice stitch length. What I always suggest is that you stitch at about half of the maximum speed when you're first learning, and then work your way up to about 75% of the maximum speed. If you're lucky enough to have a little turtle and rabbit, one of those little things on your machine that slides and controls your stitch, or excuse me, your speed. That's really nice. I say set it at about a little bit past half and then floor it all the time. What you're getting then is a constant speed from your machine, and all you have to worry about is how fast you move your hands in response to that speed. Move them really, really fast, and you're going to get tiny little stitches. Move it really slow, excuse me, you're going to get big, long stitches. Move it really slow, and you're going to get tiny little stitches right on top of each other. And so you have to adjust along the way so that you control that stitch length.
So then, do you have any sort of tips on how you would practice doing that? Sort of maybe how you get into a rhythm?
Absolutely. One of the things I suggest is that you put music on, because music has rhythm to it and it calms you. So that's one of the first things. And then get in a really good, comfortable position in front of your machine and have a bunch of junky fabric and old batting scraps. And what I want you to do is listen to your machine. And most people don't think about listening to their machine. And you're going to hear when your machine actually basically changes gears and goes into the really hyper fast speed. And you want to stop it just before that. You can actually hear it and you can feel it and get used to how your machine sounds and feels when it's at that speed. When you get to that speed, don't change your presser foot pressure at all, your gas pedal pressure at all. Keep your foot on there, however it is on there, to maintain that speed. A lot of times people are constantly lifting their foot up because they panic. Just keep that speed constant. And then very slowly move your hands and see what those stitches look like. And then move your hands a little faster and see what those stitches look like. And keep moving your hands at different speeds until you look down and you go, oh, those are the stitches I'm looking for. Those are nice, wonderful stitches. They look like the stitches I have when I'm piecing, and I like the size of them. And then pay attention to how fast you're moving your hands while you're doing that. We have to pay attention. And we don't. You know, we get busy and we're just doing our thing. But pay attention when you're practicing, not only to how your body moves and how the machine is responding to you, but pay attention to what you're doing and how fast you're moving and what your machine sounds like. I can sit and stitch and know exactly what I'm doing by how everything sounds rather than how I feel. I know what my machine is supposed to sound like.
So it sounds like practice makes perfect, and you just got to get used to your machine. All right, we have one more question about free motion, but real quick, I just want to remind anybody watching that if you have any questions that you want to ask Heather, feel free to submit those in the comment box below this video, and we'll work our way through as many questions as we can throughout this hour. Our next question, again about free motion, is from Charlotte, and she says that she keeps getting little wads of bobbin thread on the back of her quilts when she does free motion. Any helpful hints on how to correct her stitches or what might be the problem?
Well, I think I know what the problem is, but every time I say to a student, this is what I think happened, they go, no, 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 no. And I'm like, I think so, I think so, I think so. One of the things that we do is we forget to put our foot down, our presser foot. And we'll be sewing along and we'll stop because we're going to turn our quilt or something, and we'll have lifted our presser foot up, and then we forget to put that presser foot down. And we don't really know because of that hopper on the foot. So we don't know if that foot is in the up position because we have our presser foot up, or if it's in the up position because that's where it's at in the hopping process. But that is going to give you what we call a bird's nest immediately if you try to stitch with your presser foot up. So that could be something that's happening if this is far and few between. If you're getting tons of little tiny catches on the back of your quilt, then you've got a burr. And burrs can be kind of tough. If you have a front-loading or a side-loading bobbin, you can actually pull your bobbin case out and run your finger in there and see if it gets caught on anything. If it gets caught on something, that's a little burr in the metal. And that can hook that thread ever so slightly, and it's enough to put that little bird's nest on the back. So my first thing would see if you can find a burr. If you can, just use a little fingernail file and file it. It's really easy to do. If you can't find the burr yourself and it keeps happening, you'll have to take it in and say, this is what's happening. I think there's a burr in there somewhere. And that happens when you break a needle and it gets caught down there. Let's say you put in a bobbin that's slightly warped, if it's a metal bobbin, and it's scraped up in there. All sorts of things can cause those little burrs. But that's the most common reason why we get those little tiny kind of garnuncles on the back of our sewing and on the back of our quilts. That's a little thread, and it's because it's getting caught on something down inside the machine.
Perfect. And I think just from experience too, a lot of times when you have problems with your machine, it's the little things that'll get you every time. So you got a lot of things you can check.
Yeah. And sometimes just unthreading the machine, taking out the bobbin, rethreading the machine, and re-putting in the bobbin is enough to fix whatever little problem. Yeah. Just kind of resetting the whole thing.
Yeah. It's like turning your computer off. Sometimes
Exactly. Yeah.
Perfect. Yep. We're going to move on a little bit to some questions about batting. So somebody wants to know if there's a way you can join batting together to get the size required for a king-size quilt.
Absolutely. So if you've bought a king-size quilt batting these days, half the time they're not big enough for your quilt. We've got such tall mattresses and all that stuff, and so we need really big battings. The most important thing is that you want to never overlap batting, because then you're going to be able to feel that through the quilt. So you take your batting, you make sure that you've cut it true, the pieces that you're going to join together, and you butt them together right next to each other, and you sew them together with a very wide zigzag. And that zigzag should be as wide as you can get it in the width and pretty far apart, your stitch length pretty far apart also. And that's plenty to hold that batting together. But that's the best way to do that. Try not to stretch the batting out when you're doing it. And if you get any kind of rumples in the batting when you're sewing it together, just use a steam iron to press it flat before you put it between the layers of your quilt. So just butt those edges together, no overlapping, and a big wide zigzag. And it works wonderfully.
Perfect. And you kind of touched on this just a little bit, but we have a question from Jackie, and she wants to know how you get packaged batting smooth before you use it. So with a steam iron, is that what you would suggest?
Yeah, that's kind of messy. That's why a lot of people prefer to buy it off the big rolls, because it hasn't been so compacted. There's two different ways that you can go about doing it. One is easier, and one is better. The easier way is to take the batting out, lay it out on the floor, spritz it with a water bottle, and put it in your dryer on low heat for a while. And that should get basic wrinkles out of it. But if it's got big depressions from being wrapped in a tight curl, the dryer won't get it out that way. And so I use a steam iron. And you've got to get those out, because otherwise it will actually end up distorting your finished project. So definitely get those big depressions out, and the steam iron's your best friend for that.
And is that work on all different kinds of batting, and do you have a type of batting you like to use?
I would certainly not use that technique on polyester batting, but I don't use polyester batting. Polyesters, I always forget that polyester's out there because I wouldn't let it in my home. So definitely for all the cotton, the wool, silk, and those wool silk blends, and even the blends that have polyester in them. If you're going to do that, though, make sure you use a pressing cloth. You don't have to use a Teflon pressing cloth. You can use just a piece of muslin, anything that the steam can get through. The Teflon, it can't get through, whereas the muslin, it can. And you need to do that because the poly will get hot and it will melt, and you don't want a hard, crisp batting inside your quilt. So anything other than all polyester, you can use that technique for, but if it's got polyester in it, just use that pressing sheet, that cotton pressing sheet.
Perfect. Again, we just want to remind people that if you're watching along and you think of a question that you want to ask, go ahead and put that in the comment box below. And also want to remind people to sign up for our free newsletter at nationalquilterscircle.com, and tons of information there. And also connect with us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, all sorts of things available out there. All right, we got a few more questions here. You mentioned muslin, so we have some questions about muslin. Someone wants to know if you can use muslin as a backing for your quilts.
Well, you certainly can if you're a really good quilter, because any solid colored fabric on the back of your quilt is going to show every single mistake that you make, even if you're using matching thread. A lot of people will use really busy fabrics on the back of their quilts so that if there's any issues, and there's more issues on the back than there are on the front when it comes to machine quilting, they're going to be hidden. So yeah, you can use muslin. It's less expensive than a lot of the other fabrics. If you're using a high quality muslin, I like Rocklon's permanent press muslin. It's beautiful. It has the same hand as regular quilting cotton. I wouldn't go to my discount fabric store and buy the $2 a yard muslin. And so if you're talking about using muslin so that you can save money, there's a big dichotomy there. Spending lots of money on the fabric for the front of the quilt, for the thread and your time and your energy, and then putting an an inexpensive fabric on the back to cut corners. I always say make fewer quilts that are of a higher quality than making tons of quilts that are of a lower quality. That being said, you know, whenever there's a fabric sale, I go and buy fabric on sale for my backs. So if there's, you know, most quilt stores have a little section of their fabrics that didn't sell well. You know, if I know I use lots of jewel-toned colors in my quilting, then I'll go look to see what kind of jewel-colored fabrics they have there, and buy yards of it when it's $3 or $4 or $5 a yard. And that's a great way of building up backing fabrics. And so, you know, if there's 10 yards still on the bolt, I'll buy 10 yards of one fabric. It might end up on, you know, 8 different quilts by the time I've used it up. But at least I know I'm using a high-quality quilting fabric on my backs. So yes, you can use the muslin as long as it's high-quality muslin, but keep in mind that it's going to show those stitches really, really well. So if you're a kick-butt quilter, yeah, go ahead, use that muslin. But if you're just starting out, or if you, you know, are a little bit hesitant in that quilting, choose something busier. Choose something that's going to hide a lot of eagles. You'll be happier, I think.
Well, see, and who doesn't want to just go and buy yards and yards and have an awesome fabric? Well, so along those same lines, someone also wants to know about using flannel as a quilt back and whether you would recommend that.
Well, flannel is an interesting little monster. Flannel is made, it's a double weave, and it's made by the top surface being cut. So flannel is actually a very weak fabric. People don't understand that it doesn't have a lot of longevity to it. A flannel fabric has about half the lifespan of a regular woven cotton fabric. So that bit of information will help you determine whether or not it goes on this quilt or that quilt. Plus, a lot of flannels are very thick. So a thinner flannel would be kind of easy to quilt through. A thick flannel is going to be kind of tough. I would much rather see you using flannel on the back of your quilt than minky. Minky's polyester, and that's a whole other thing. It might be soft and wonderful, but it's highly, highly flammable, whereas the flannel's not going to be. If you're looking for warmth, instead of going with a flannel for the backing, just choose a really warm batting, a wool or a wool silk or a silk blend batting. Those are really warm battings. The flannel isn't going to make things warmer. It's simply going to make things kind of softer. So yes, you can use it. It's going to add bulk, so it's going to make it a little harder if it's a bed-size quilt or a large quilt, because it's about double the weight. But you can certainly give it a try.
Perfect. Okay. So since we're talking about different kinds of fabrics, I know a lot of quilters have opinions on whether you pre-wash all your fabrics and whether you don't pre-wash. So if you are using your muslins and flannels on the back, do you need to make sure and pre-wash and pre-shrink those if you're going to use them?
There's just so much information and misinformation out there. I remember when Harriet Hargrave came out with her book and said, oh, you do not have to pre-wash your fabrics. And that's all everybody heard was, oh, I don't have to pre-wash my fabric anymore. Well, they didn't really choose to remember the next paragraph that said that if you're not going to wash your fabrics, you need to pre-test them all. Meaning you need to cut a little piece off and get it wet and see whether or not it runs. So these days, there are a lot of hyper-saturated fabrics out there. That's how we get those really intense colors, and a lot of them run. And I hate to say it, but to meet the demand, fabrics are being made faster, quicker, and less well than they used to be made. And I think it's important. I always wanted to know what my fabric was going to do before I started using it. You know, I put 3 or 4 different pieces of fabric in the laundry, in the wash, and they all come out looking differently when they're done. I want to know what they're going to look like when they're done. Not finish the whole quilt and get a quilt finished and go, ooh, that one's misbehaving. You know, I want to know what they're going to do. But whatever you do, if you launder the fabric for the front of the quilt, launder the fabric for the back of the quilt. If you didn't launder the fabric for the front of the quilt, then don't launder the fabric for the back of the quilt. You want everything to you can't really say it's all going to shrink the same way, because one fabric might shrink 3% and one might shrink 6%. But you kind of want them to shrink together, or whether that's before the piecing or after the quilting. Whatever you do, do it consistently.
Perfect. Okay. Another sort of opinion question. I know some people feel really strongly one way or the other about this, but Brenda wants to know, what is your opinion on whether you should iron quilting fabrics with steam or just a dry iron?
I say make that baby lay flat, however you can do it. I would much rather press a block into shape than square it up. When you square up a block, you risk losing part of the design in that block, so that when you go to piece it together, tips get lost and things get lost. If something is a little misshapen, I can take it back to square with my iron. I have an ironing board cover that has a grid on it. It's the best thing ever, because I can put a block on there and know immediately whether or not that block is square. If it's not square, I can use my iron with steam in it to press certain portions of the block so that I can push that seam out to the line that makes it square. If you steam iron, you want to make sure that you're still pressing rather than ironing. When we iron our clothes, we're moving that iron across the surface and we're pushing it. When we iron, when we quilt, we do that a little bit differently. What we want to do is we want to position the seam exactly where we want it and then set the iron down. We don't want to move the iron around. We want to just set the iron down, then lift it up. Set the next seam exactly where we want it, then set the iron down. So it doesn't really matter whether there's steam or not steam in it. We can't misshapen the fabric by just putting down a steam iron. We misshapen the fabric by ironing instead of pressing. And what we really want to do in quilting is press our seams. So remember, don't glide that iron all over the surface of your quilt or all over the surface of your blocks. Pick it up, press the seam, pick it up, set the seam, press the seam, instead of doing that back and forth movement. That's what's going to distort your blocks. So basically, any inappropriate ironing is going to distort your blocks, whether you have steam or dry iron. And that also depends on your iron. If your iron is very, very lightweight, it's not going to press your seams very well. We need the weight of an iron. So when you're selecting an iron, choose a big, heavy one. And I know that you say, my arms have hurt, my hands hurt, I don't want a heavy iron. Well, I'd rather have to press it once with a heavy iron than have to press it 3 or 4 times with a lightweight iron. So get some heft to your iron too. You can get like a Black & Decker one for 15 bucks at Walmart. It's a great iron, real big and heavy. But just press instead of ironing. And if you're having a problem, if you've pieced a very ornate block that's got 69 different pieces in it, you're going to want a steam iron, because that's really the only way you're going to get all those intersecting seams to lay flat. So just press carefully, either way.
That's perfect, and a great tip too, especially if you are new to quilting and maybe you've done ironing in the past and now you're coming into pressing. It's a good thing to practice and kind of get used to the difference in how you do that.
Yeah.
We have a question here. Angela asks, do you use any special detergents or color catchers when you wash your fabrics or quilts?
No, I don't. And the reason I don't is because I come from a dyeing background. I've been dyeing fabric for many, many years, and I launder everything I own, whether it's my clothes or my fabric, in a product called Synthropol. And Synthropol can be purchased at almost any quilt store these days, and it's cheaper than regular laundry detergent. And basically, it's a industrial surfactant. And what it does is it pulls excess dyes away from the fabrics and suspends them in the water and will not let them go back down on the fabric. So dyers use it so that they can wash black dyed fabric with pale yellow dyed fabric at the same time. And the colors will not transfer to each other. So I do that knowing that it's going to pull all excess dye out. There's another product called Retain, and Retain does the opposite. Retain is something that you would use on vintage textiles. It pushes the color in so that it won't come off the surface and it won't dull. So for old or very delicate fabrics, you want to keep that color in it. We want to get that excess anything out. Just like when you buy a pair of jeans and you don't wash them before you wear them and you end up with blue on your skin, that's just excess dye. The fabric can only saturate so much. So almost all of our fabrics these days have excess on the surface. So if you don't want to use Synthropol and you want to use your regular detergent, then yeah, you could use one of those color catchers. However, I have tried them out, and I was testing regular laundry soap, fabric dye catcher. I washed something 7 or 8 times, and I still kept getting color on that fabric, on that color catcher. So yes, it was catching color, but the color was just kept coming off and kept coming off. So I could choose not to use that fabric if I wanted to, but instead I simply put it through the laundry with some Synthropol. It pulled out the excess dye, and I was done. So, you know your products that you're using, and use the one that's going to give you the best output and, in my book, for the least amount of money. And so Synthropol, it's spelled Synthrapol. It's wonderful.
I'm going to have to give it a try now. All right, we have another question here. Molly wants to know what would be the best sewing machine for a beginning quilter. We touched a little bit on machines before, but if you have any recommendations for
well, I'm very, very opinionated about the sewing machine. It doesn't matter what brand it really is. What matters is where it is on that brand scale of mechanical through embroidery. Machine quilters, if quilting is going to be 90% of what you're doing, not garment making and not embroidering or anything like that, but quilting, we need a pretty basic machine. When we free motion quilt, we're asking our machine to do the most basic thing it can do, drive the needle up and down. That's all. We're moving everything else. And so we want a machine that doesn't have a whole lot of bells and whistles. So if you go into a dealer and you see that they've got machines from their mechanical ones that don't have a computer in them that are $189, they've got machines all the way up to $6,000 that aren't embroidery machines, I say if you can afford it, get the one that's right in the middle. Tell them you want to look at their midline machines. If you're going to one of the big box stores and you see 14 different machines and they're 2 or 3 different brands, find the ones that are in the middle of their price range also. Chances are it's going to be just what you need, not too much and enough. You want to make sure that it can drop its feed dogs. You want to make sure that it can, it has feet that you need. So if you want to use a walking foot and you want to use a free motion foot, it is best if you buy those feet that are manufactured for that machine. If you can't get one manufactured, you can certainly use the generic ones. But A, they're not going to work as well, and B, they tend to be very, very, very noisy. They're very clunky because they don't fit all that well, and so you have to listen to that clunky sound as you're sewing. So, Brother has great machines, Fock has great machines, Viking has great machines, Bernina has great machines, Elna has great machines, Singer has great machines. They all have great machines. Choose one that's a midline machine if you're a machine quilter. It's not going to give you so much trouble. Now, in my opinion, a machine that has a front-loading bobbin or a side-loading bobbin is better for free motion quilting, mainly because you can control the tension on your bobbin, whereas other machines, all you can control is the top tension because they have the drop-in bobbin case and it's sealed. You can't get in there and change things around. So I always suggest a rotary, which is that front-loading or side-loading bobbin, if you can. You should be able to get a decent machine for free motion quilting, for machine quilting, for piecing, anywhere from $500, and I would say I probably wouldn't spend more than about $3,000. I might go up to $4,000 if it's a high-end machine like a Bernina, but you don't have to have a Bernina to quilt. I know a lot of people think they have to have a fancy machine to quilt. No, you just need to have a machine that's in really good repair.
I think that's great too. I'm suggesting a midline machine, even if you are, or mid-level machine, even if you are a beginner, because it gives you room to grow with that machine. You don't want to get one that's too basic and then outgrow it and then just be in the market right away for a new one. So get something that you can expand with also. Yeah. Perfect. So speaking of quilting, we have some questions here about how you keep all of your layers smooth and together when you're quilting, how to avoid puckers and things like that on the back of your quilts. So any suggestions you have for that looks like would be great.
I hate the word shame, but this is a saying that it just works. The saying goes, puckers on the front, shame on the piecer. Puckers or pleats on the back, shame on the quilter. So if you did both of those things, if you pieced and quilted and you have puckers on either place, it's kind of your doing. However, there are great ways to keep that from happening. If the bulk of your damage happens on the back, meaning that you have little foldovers or little pleats on the back, it's because you didn't properly stretch your back before you basted, or maybe you didn't baste at all. When we quilt, whether we have the feed dogs up or not, we have 3 layers that can move independently from each other, and we want them to kind of act like they're not independent from each other before we even start stitching them. I always stretch the back of my quilts if the quilt has any side that's bigger than about 24 inches. If it's a little tiny wall piece or a little tiny piece, then I won't stretch it. But I do stretch that back. Now, when I say stretch, I don't mean stretch it all cattywampus. I mean simply pull out any fullness so that there's nothing loose in the body of the back. So you're going to lay your backing out and either clamp it to a table or tape it to a table, and that's important. And you want it to be somewhat taut, but not so taut that you can't pick it up, pinch it and pick it up. But when you do pinch it and pick it up, when you let go, it should go ping. It should have a little tightness to it. If it's so tight you can't pick it up, you're not going to be able to baste it. If it's not tight enough to have that little ping, then you're going to risk having those puckers and pleats. Then you have to baste, and there's so many different ways of basting, and everybody has something that makes them happy. Now, what makes me happy on a bed-size quilt is passing that quilt off to a long-arm quilter, not to quilt, because I love the quilting, but to baste. And so a big bed quilt I give to a long-arm quilter, charges $40, and she'll baste it in a 6-inch grid. And that's close enough, that 6-inch quilting, to hold everything in place, and I know I'm not going to get any puckers or pleats. But if you don't have the time to do that, or you don't want to spend the money on doing that, which I definitely understand, then stretch that backing. Put your batting on, smooth it on. Put the top on, smooth it on. And you want to baste, the same way that you're going to quilt. Now, some people always say you have to start from the center out when you quilt. Not necessarily. You just have to know where you're going to start quilting in relationship to your backing and batting excess. So if you're going to start quilting near the center of your quilt, then you want to have a lot of excess all the way around your quilt. But if you've got long rows and you're going to quilt in those rows, you can start quilting at the top of the quilt in the middle row and quilt all the way down. And when you do that, it pushes excess batting and backing down to the bottom of the quilt. So have extra excess on the bottom of the quilt if that's how you know you're going to be quilting from the top down. Just make sure that you have plenty of batting and backing so that you don't get all the way done and you're out there quilting your border and you're like, oh my goodness, I'm going to have to trim my border down because I don't have any batting here or backing here. It's not worth it to scrimp on that batting and backing and end up with not enough on the outside edge. So you don't have to start quilting in the middle. You can decide where you want to start. Make sure you have enough batting and backing fabric to make that happen. And the most important thing is that when you're basting, you want to make sure that anything that you have difficulty with on the top, any little puckers that you have on the top, you want to make sure those are held down really well. I used to tell people all the time to, baste where you're pretty sure you're not going to quilt, but these days we're going to quilt over the whole surface. We're going to quilt close together. We know it's really good for our quilts. And so I pin baste with straight pins. Most people use safety pins. Some people use that tack system. Some people use spray based. But I use straight pins. And so if I'm doing a large throw, let's say it's a 75-inch throw, and I haven't given it to a long armor to quilt, what I do is I put my backing down, I stretch it, put it in place with some tape, put my batting down, put my top down, and wherever I'm going to quilt first, I put a lot of straight pins. And the pins that I use are called silk pins. Now, there's a problem. I hate throwing around makers or brands, but there's only 2 really good brands. You want the ones that have little tiny metal heads, not glass heads, because your foot won't get caught on them as often. And the 2 brands that I like the best are Iris, I-R-I-S, or the initials IBC. Most other brands say they're silk pins, but they're not very thin. And you want this really, really thin pin. The reason you want this thin pin is because you want to be able to sew over it. And yes, I did say sew right over that pin. I think it's so funny to watch people take out pins before they get to them. Like, why'd you pin in the first place? I don't know. This pin is so thin that if your needle of your machine hits it, chances are it will break the pin, but it's not going to break your needle. You don't want to break your needle on a pin or anything like that because it could throw the timing of your machine out. I have never, ever, ever broken a needle on one of these pins. Now, if you hit the head, you're going to break a needle. But they're so thin, and so I will pin that whole area I'm going to quilt first, and then just put some big safety pins around the outside edge to hold that outside edge together so it's not flopping about. And it also has the tension on the backing fabric. Then after I've quilted that first area, I take the pins out, I put the quilt down on a tabletop, and I smooth it towards the outside border and put some more pins in the area I'm going to quilt next. I leave those safety pins out there, though, so that it holds everything in place. So straight pins, I love them. I think they're fabulous. Yes, you're going to poke yourself in the beginning. Yes, you're going to scratch yourself in the beginning. But after a while, you kind of get used to the fact that they're there, and you hold the quilt a little bit differently, and you won't be doing that anymore. And you're not going to have any puckers or pleats on the back.
Perfect. Okay. Again, I just want to remind anyone who's been watching from the beginning, or maybe just joining us now, if you have any questions that you want to ask, go ahead and put those in the comment box below this video, and we'll make our way through answering some more questions. Another question about when you're quilting, because you mentioned using straight pins versus these safety pins. If you're using quilting a really, really large quilt on your home machine, do you fold it? Do you roll it? How do you work it underneath your presser foot?
Yeah, I don't do the folding or the rolling or anything like that. I make sure that I have an L shape set up in front of me. So the table that my machine is on is one leg of the L, and then I put another table to the left of me that forms that L, and that is what the bulk of the quilt will lay on. The reason I don't roll or do any of those things is because that roll becomes very heavy, and it's generally in the wrong place. What I do is I just wad the quilt up in my lap, kind of wear it on my chest, have it on that second table of the L, and all I think about is the area in front of me and where I'm going next. I don't think about the rest of that quilt. If I had to think about the rest of that quilt, I'd never quilt a big quilt ever because it's so overwhelming. I just think about this one little portion I'm quilting and where I'm going next. And I quilt that area, and then I reposition the quilt as needed, kind of put it back in my lap and on my chest and on the table next to me, and then quilt that little area. I don't think about the rest of it, and I don't consider it a burden. I just consider it the next part that has to be quilted. If you consider it a burden, if you start thinking about, oh, this big old quilt, then it's going to feel like a burden. But no, rolling it up seems to really just get in the way. Folding it up seems to get in the way. I just leave it as open as I can get it and jam it underneath there.
Perfect. That's however it works. Yeah. All right, so moving on to, after you've made your quilt and you've quilted it, what are some of your recommendations for how to hang it and how to display a quilt?
Well, if you're talking big quilts, if you're talking bed-sized quilts, your best bet is definitely a sleeve. And a lot of people say, well, I don't like the sleeves. I don't like the way it hangs in the sleeve. Well, that's not the sleeve's fault. It's the rod that you put in there that you're hanging it with. A lot of people will put really big, thick pieces of wood in there or round dowels in there, big round dowels. Those don't work. What you want is a piece of lathe, L-A-T-H-E, which is a very flat piece of wood. It's usually about a ½ inch wide. And you can get that at a Home Depot or wherever, and they'll even cut it for you if you want to. That's a really great thing to put through a sleeve. So make sure that whatever you're putting through your sleeve is very, very flat rather than rounded or thick, because that will make the quilt hang in a funky way. So if it's a big quilt, if it's a heavy quilt, the sleeve is the best bet because it actually gives you tension across the whole top. But here's the trick. What some people don't realize is that if you put a sleeve on the bottom of that quilt too and put another piece of wood in there, that quilt is going to hang beautifully. So I always double sleeve a large quilt. Sleeve on top, sleeve on the bottom, and that bottom one gives it some weight and pulls out any fullness that might be in the quilt. But if it's a smaller piece, there's so many other ways that you can do it. You can take a square of fabric and fold it in half on the diagonal so that you have a triangle that has a fold on one side. And you put the raw edges of the triangle in the two corners of one side of the quilt and the raw edges of another in the other two corners. And then the folded ones are at an angle this way in those corners. And then all you have to do is put a stick between the two and hang it from that stick. So that's a really easy way to hang small quilts. Another great way to hang small quilts, so we're talking, you know, probably nothing bigger than about 14 or 15 inches across, is to buy those plastic drapery O-rings in the drapery department. They're just plastic circles, and you can whip stitch those onto the corners and hang from 2 nails. So these are ways that, you know, you can take just a basic quilt and hang them. A lot of people with their art quilts these days are mounting their art quilts first on canvas. And then, of course, it gets to hang just like a picture would hang, and that's pretty much what I do most of the time. It gives it a rigid base to hang off of, and it pulls it off of the wall. And that's another thing. Quilts, in my opinion, that are made to be artwork, that are made to hang on the wall, not quilts that just ended up so beautiful that we wanted to hang them on the wall, so there's a difference there, but quilts that were made to be artwork, they look better if they're pulled off the surface of the wall, not hanging flat on them. So any type of board that you can mount them on, and you can get pre-stretched canvases, you can get other types of boards that are, they look almost like a shadow box, and you use the back side of it, not the hollow side. Any of those things are great to hang a quilt on. Some people will mount a quilt directly to a piece of canvas with fabric glue, which is what I do. And that means that quilt is never coming off. It also means the back of that quilt's never going to show. So if any of those little things happen, you don't have to worry about it. But a lot of people say, well, I don't want it permanently attached. Well, that's okay, because you can use the sticky back Velcro. It's wonderful. And you can put it on the canvas and on the quilt. You can't do that on anything too big because the quilt becomes too weighty. But that's a great way to put it on your canvas. So you use the sticky back on the canvas and then the sew-on your quilt. And then you just attach it, pull it down, and you could actually trade out quilts on one canvas if you wanted to, so you'd have a variety of wall art. But those are some of the ways that I like to hang my quilts.
Those are great ideas. I never would have thought of the Velcro. I like that one. We have just under 15 minutes or so left, so I want to remind you that if you have any questions, hit those, and we'll get those answered as best we can. Again, I want to remind you that if you like watching this, but you didn't quite catch it from the beginning, these are rewatchable on our National Quilter Circle YouTube channel. Other ways to connect with us are on social media, Facebook, Pinterest, Twitter, so all sorts of ways that you can get in touch with us, and I hope we can answer all your questions that you have. So if any of you are familiar with any of the work you've seen of Heather Thomas's here, she's really into embellishing work and doing a lot of art quilts. And so people want to know how you get your ideas for what you create.
Well, that's a tough question because I do so many different things. I'm a real what-if girl. The question is always in my head, what if I try this? What if I do this? There are a lot of embellishments out there that somebody had that same idea. We use Lutrador. Some gal in England thought, you know, what if I paint this? Can I use it in my work? Other people are using Angelina fibers, which are fine mylar, and it responds to heat, and it's wonderful, and it's iridescent, and it was in the crafting industry, and we brought it into the quilting industry. And you know, my question whenever I start a quilt is, do I have something I want to say? And for me, it's not that esoteric. What do I want to have something I want to say? It's, do I want to express something with color and shape, and what do I want to explore? So my thought is, what do you want to explore? If the person who asked this is asking it because she wants to explore embellishments, then I would definitely start playing with embellishments. Don't go out and buy a ton of different things. Go out and buy 1 or 2 different things that you want to explore. See if you like them, and if you like them, build up your bounty of them, if you will. A lot of times we get caught up in purchasing all the new and fabulous things that are available, but we never get around to using them. So I always say, you know, start small and then grow. There are so many fabulous books out there on embellishments, including my first book, and there's so much instruction out there. But what I always say is, try something. Ask yourself if the end result is going to give you what you need in your quilt. If launderability is what you need and it doesn't launder, then maybe it's not something you're going to put in your toolkit. Whereas if it's an art quilt and you don't care about laundering, you don't have to worry about that issue. The question is do I like the way it looks? Did I like playing with it? Did I enjoy playing with it? When I sit down to start a new project, my first thought is, what do I want to explore? What do I want to express? How do I want to play? And what do I want to play with? And here's the most important thing that I could tell anybody who's going to start playing with embellishments. It's hard to know when enough is enough. And you don't want your piece to end up looking like the cat gacked on it. You want it to actually look, you know, beautiful or intriguing or whatever. So I pull forth all of the products I think I'm going to use. And so I have a coordinating color family of fabrics and up to 3 embellishments. I would never put more than 3 different types of embellishments on a surface. It becomes too just gaudy, if you will. So let's say I'm going to play with fabric, and I'm going to play with beads, and I'm going to play with a little bit of luchador, which is a melting polyester type fabric, and I'm going to do decorative stitching, because decorative stitching is an embellishment. And so those 3 things I would pull together in a color family. And that's it. I'm done. I'm not going to go shopping in my studio anymore. I'm going to answer all the questions from what I have in front of me. The problem when you start to create from nothing, there's no pattern in front of you, there's no pre-described picture in front of you that you're trying to do, is that it's all about questions. You'll do something, and whatever you did will then ask you a question, and you have to respond by what you do next, and that asks the next question. Art making is call and response. And we get a little bit flustered, and then we go to our studio, and we go look at our fabrics, and we go look at our embellishments, and we think they have the answers. No, they don't. You have the answers. You have everything you need right in front of you. This is what you need. This is what you chose. This is what you have to make this project, and you can make it work. Respond to the things that you have right in front of you, and explore and play. And don't take it so darn seriously. I am never serious about a piece of work, ever. I have thrown more work away than the average person will ever finish. You know, it's play. So explore and play, have a good time with it, and just don't take yourself so seriously when you're playing with all of those new techniques and new products.
And just a quick follow-up on that, because I know this is one of the areas where you and I differ the most, is that I like perfection and things to be a certain way, and you can kind of go with the flow. So if you're someone that's more like me, how do you kind of break out of that and feel free being able to create something?
How?
Yeah, how do you do that? How do you not worry so much?
I don't know that many of us can change our core personalities, but we can loosen up. And one of the best things to loosen up is to work small. If you work small, especially when you're exploring a new technique, you're not investing that much time or energy or money into it. So if it doesn't work out the way you want it to, it's not that big of a deal. So I would definitely suggest always working small when you're learning something new. That way, if it turns out to not be you, who cares? Throw it over your shoulder and start something else. The other thing is to remember, and this is one of the most important things, if I could teach all humans one thing, if I could teach every human on this earth one thing, whether they quilt or not, it would be that the beauty is in the wobbly line. It is. It's what brings the humanness to what we do. It's what brings the homemade and handmade to what we do. The beauty is in the wobbly line. And I didn't come up with this. Some young art student, I saw her on a show, and she made that statement, and I was like, oh my goodness, she is so right. Because it's our humanity. And so if our ego is caught up in the work that we do, then every little mistake we make, we're going to have a problem with. If we can set that ego aside and say, we're just here to have fun, we're just here to explore, we're just here to make something out of nothing, something that wasn't here before, and whatever happens, happens, you're going to be so much happier. And it's going to feel more like play. And for me, that's what it should be.
Well, I'm going to have to give it a try, but it's going to be hard. All right, so we have just over 5 minutes left, so we have a couple more questions we'll get to, and then we'll wrap it up. But Lynn says, I'm new to long arm quilting, and I keep getting little thread nubs. She starts and stops quilting. Do you have any suggestions on how to fix that?
Yeah, you're taking too long to knot off. You're taking way too many stitches when you're knotting off. Whether you're long arm stitching or stitching on your machine, really the maximum that you should see that needle go up and down is 4 times. more than that, and you're going to get those gernunkles. That's such a great word. And anytime if you've ever watched a quilt show being judged, so many of the judges will run their hands over the surface of the quilt, and if they can feel those starts and stops, and that's those little, balls of knotted thread, they will comment on it, and it does detract from the quilt. So don't stay in that one place so long. Either slow your machine down so that you're stitching very, very slowly, and you can count that up and down motion when you do that beginning and ending stitch, or move the machine faster. So, it's that all in one spot that's going to give you that big old gnarly knot. So less stitches, move faster.
Okay, perfect. All right, so our last question here is BJ asks, I have made a few quilts recently, and my most frustrating issue is the binding, both the front and the back. So what are your tips for attaching a binding? Do you use a special foot when you're doing your binding, or a special technique?
Do I what now?
Do you use a special foot when you're using stitching on your binding, or?
No,
okay.
I use just a, first of all, I like a tight, very tight, small binding, and so I cut my binding for a double French binding. I cut it 1 7/8 inch, so it's scant smaller than 2 inches. When I do 2 inches, it ends up being too big on the back. I always sew my bindings on the front by machine, and then fold it over and sew it on the back by hand. But one of my tricks is that before I go to sew it on, I set the edge of the quilt on the ironing board, and I finger press that binding away from the seam really hard with my fingers, and then press it with the iron. When I do this, it makes the back fit really, really well. Binding takes practice. It's one of those things that a lot of people never, ever really get down. If you have a local quilt shop that offers a binding class, it would be really, really worth doing that. Or coming, if you're a member here or you're thinking about being a member here, look up and see if there's any videos on binding so you can actually see it happening. There's lots of different ways to do the beginning and ends. There's lots of different ways to make it continuous. But practice is going to make it better.
Perfect. Lots of great tips. I want to thank you again for being here and sharing all of your knowledge.
It was fun.
Perfect. Yes, it was a lot of fun. I even learned a lot of things and things I want to go try. So I'm excited. And I want to thank all of you that were watching too. Those that submitted questions beforehand or asked us questions during this live event. We really appreciate you. And hopefully you keep joining in. We are going to have one of these National Quilter Circle live events every month. So if you tuned in late to this one, tune in next month and keep tuning in. We'll have lots of different things that we're going to cover, different topics, all sorts of questions. Again, if you want to rewatch this entire live broadcast from the beginning, you can do that on our YouTube channel. And again, connect with us on our Facebook and other social media outlets. And again, we really enjoyed you. Thank you so much, Heather. I hope you have a good rest of your night. And good night to all of you. And we'll see you next time.
All right. Bye-bye.